good afternoon, friends, loved ones, family, all of you great people across the world. We are lighting the candle, a world that works, and I'm Bill Carell. I'm part of the host team here, and to my left, I'll just do a quick introduction, and we'll pass it around. Is Ken Caputo, and then above Ken is Lisa Sheehan, and then Jan Jeremias, who we've got a nice stable table here with four strong legs. I actually feel so. We get together mostly weekly, and last week we recorded um, our 100th uh, podcast episode for lighting the candle of the world that works.
Woohoo!
Yeah, I know, isn't that's fun? And so, Ken, what does that mean?
Uh, Means we keep going.
Not much, right?
whenever,
So
whenever, whenever something significant would happen in one of my lessons, my mentor, my teacher would immediately say, "What was that?" And my response would be, "Nothing special."
yep.
And just continuing to find that, just balance and move forwards. But you take a moment to celebrate the milestones because they're definitely worth celebrating, and then back to work.
Yes, all kidding aside, there's a lot of hours of dedicated conversation that have gone into getting us to this point. And then we also recognize that it's not a good thing to stand on our laurels of what worked in another episode. So we're constantly generating new conversation that's geared towards empowering us first. We'll know we're getting it done if we're empowered. And then you, our dedicated listeners that we know, like, and trust. And as a result of us having these conversations, maybe the world looks a little bit better for a time, or there's an opportunity to take some useful conversational bits that we've given you, because we get to cover almost every angle of what people can know to some degree. We're at least skimming along the surface of it. So, in keeping with our tradition of kind of picking a word or two, there's something that's coming up for me today. And I think the first one is equilibrium. And the second one is integration. And from that standpoint, I will kind of defer to somebody else who wants to pick it up. But I'm tossing out the two words for us to really get into and distinguish and see what conclusions or ideas we can bring on the table here today. Equilibrium and integration.
I was going to look it up, but the second you said equilibrium, because I thought of that, we've talked about balance, or I brought up homeostasis, or getting back to the center of things. So, and
Yeah.
God knows it's in nature, and God knows it's not in nature as well. So, um, but I'll look it up. But that's the first thing that came back to me is like getting back to center. And there's so many different words in the English language for that kind of thing.
Yeah. I've got a mind picture of shaking up a bottle with water and maybe some liquid soap in it. And what happens is as you shake it, it changes the state of the water, into kind of a plasma of bubbles and that sort of thing. But over time, it dissipates and goes back to looking just like clear water again. So it's out of balance, or not in equilibrium after it's been shaken, and it potentially has the ability to go back and be in that state again as soon as somebody acts on it. And
Um, right away, Bill, as you say that though, I thought of your second word of integration, and that water is somewhat. If you ever notice, it's always a little cloudier. Like it's never absolutely clear. So there is some soap that is then integrated into that liquid, and so therefore, you know, that base is not the same. The base, whatever the base element we might say is water, is not exactly the same as it was previously.
I think that's brilliant. And then, yes, and if you let it sit long enough, you'll actually see the water start to separate from the soap again. So the soap starts congealing with itself into a layer. Sometimes it's, it's specific gravity is less than water and it sits on top, or it's heavier than water and it sits on the bottom. And you'll definitely see that with like Italian dressing and the three different stratas with oil, water, and vinegar in that. So it's kind of a neat thing to regard almost everything as having the potential of these two words that we're talking about, uh, from our daily conversations to what's going on in the world. And I'm really interested in hearing, Lisa, what definitions you've got.
Well, Oxford declares it to be a state in which opposing forces or influences are balanced. So I think opposing is the interesting word there too.
Yeah, almost a mind picture of a pendulum that sooner or later, once set into motion, swings out to the right and to the left or wherever it does swing. And then after a time, left on its own, it sort of stops at some point where it's no longer moving until it gets put into motion again.
And apparently something should not be mixed, because I used to be madly in love with Jello 123. I don't know if you ever remember that.
Do you ever
But it
make
created
popsicles with it?
layers, but apparently there was something unhealthy in one of the layers, so they had to take it off the market.
Isn't that the way it always goes? The thing
Yep.
that's the best. Upon further reflection and testing here, this probably shouldn't be on the market.
There's no equilibrium here.
Exactly. So integration. What do y'all have for integration?
No, let me look that. I could spell. So Oxford says the action or process of integrating. I hate when they're like that.
That's not helpful.
Yeah. Is there more?
Well, it says the act or process of uniting different things.
Yeah.
So that's uniting. What was the word of the other one?
Equilibrium?
Yeah. It wasn't
And
uniting. Was it unite? It wasn't uniting.
no. Integration.
It was
And again, if
of opposing. Yeah, and this is different things. Yeah.
sure. If you think about the components of first the soap and the water, and then the Italian dressing, and Italian dressing is really cool because it's got solids in it as well. It's little bits of onion and garlic, and I don't know, maybe some oregano, or perhaps our favorite basil. You never know, right? All of those things, if you shake it up really well, you will equally disperse it for a moment on top of your salad and have an integrated Italian dressing. So integration, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily imply anything. There's no inference that I take from it, except for if you're talking about, from a personality standpoint, the integration of people's personas. We went through, I don't know, the 60s and the 70s, where we got taught that the roles that we needed to play in different parts of our lives need to be different at work than it was at home with the children, different at church, all of those sorts of things. And then in the 90s and the early 2000s, we started talking about how disruptive that is for somebody who is trying to figure out which role model this moment called for, as opposed to just integrating all of the things that work and don't work about you into whoever you are authentically. We went back to that old authenticity and genuine, way of thinking about things. But there's another thing I think that's really kind of powerful about it too. From integration, we also get the word integrity. And what I love our language because there are just so many different ways that every single word can be used correctly. It's like, how can you ever find somebody wrong for using a word that you've never heard of? You know what I mean? So, Ken, what are your thoughts on equilibrium and integration?
Equilibrium just makes me think of the Tao, and the many conversations I've had with Taoists and Buddhists about just that idea of things are working towards that state as best they can, and you don't really achieve it. It's like you're not really in balance. It's just things are pushing and pulling, and the more well they kind of match up, the more you get that temporary illusion of balance. So, it's interesting in Tai Chi, there's this practice called push hands. And, one of the things you're actually looking to do is they call it creating silk, which, comes from the idea of if you were to, pulling silk meant that you had to have a steady amount of pressure. And if you pull too fast or too hard, it would break, the strand would break. And if you pull too slow, it would clump. So in push hands, it was the right amount of tension between the two players, and you could move for hours like that with this connection. And the idea was not for the connection not to break. So when someone pushes hard, you had to yield more effectively to that. If they didn't push as hard, you had to adjust your yielding to maintain the flow.
Yeah.
So it just seems like to me, it was always a very powerful way to pay attention. So instead of, like right now, if you listen to a lot of like political rhetoric, it's hard pushing or hard pulling as a counter, instead of how do we create, equilibrium through the right amount of tension, in response. So, but no one's trying to do that. They're just trying to knock each other down, or not engage at all, one or the other. So, and I remember when I started learning push hands, at first I had that mindset of I have to win by either moving them or not being moved, instead of paying attention to the equilibrium we were creating together and challenging each other to get more and more skilled at that. So, and it was a lot more fun that way. So,
As you say that, Ken, in the style of yoga I practice, we have what we call muscular energy and organic energy. Muscular energy is when you draw energy in, so from the periphery to the core, so from skin to muscle to bone, and you hug in. And organic energy is more expansive, and you need both in a yoga pose. You need to pull in to actually engage the muscles. And so, almost if you were to even think about it from the outside world coming in, and then as you expand out, you're going from the inside out. So, but it's also a balance between both. It's a balance between organic energy and muscular energy.
And
if you
I would imagine that there's when you're in a stable pose like that, from the outside, someone might look very still, but the experience of the person is all of these micro tremors and this dynamic work
That's
to
right.
maintain that illusion of stillness, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's a really beautiful way to practice, because it is very, it's very similar to drawing a yantra. If you've ever drawn a yantra, which is like a geometric meditation shape, you start with lines, and you start from the outside lines and you work your way into the very small, and then when you color it or paint it, you start from the inside and you work your way out. But I think what you were saying, what I'm saying, and then when you go to the word integration, and when Lisa read integration, it says the action of integrating. So integration almost seems like a very, I don't know, it's like a participatory thing in some way, like it's active.
Yeah, I love that too. And the example that you gave, Ken, is something that I've seen demonstrated to large groups of people, the difference between power and force, where force is one person trying to get somebody else to do. Like the demonstration that John